they have introduced a set of tables between the individual subledgers and the general ledger, calling it subledger set of tables, XLA. Tables are typically XLA prefixed. So the purpose of those tables is to ensure that the information that is the going through to the general ledger, no matter which application it is, which module, which subledger it is coming from, is uniformly tracked through what we call as events. Okay, so everything in this subledger module is tracked as an event. So whether it is invoice, whether it is receipt, whether it is payables payment, or whether it is payables invoice or receivables invoice or anything that you are doing in the module, it is ultimately a event. So what happens here is, between these subledger modules and the general ledger, there's a set of tables which helps you to modify, make changes to the accounting information that has come in from the subledgers. You can define certain rules using which you can make predefined changes, or your as per your requirement you can make changes to the accounting or the way the accounting has been done and then transfer it over to GL. It is also possible to put in certain automatic rules using which the XLA set of tables are able to make changes to the data that is coming from your subledgers. All right. So in subledger accounting, we can do the following. We can generate journals for the payables receivables module. We can generate accounting entries for a specific transaction. You can also generate accounting entries for a batch of transactions. You can do manual adjustment entries. You can also review the generated journals and their balances through the views or reports. So these are couple of things which you can do in the subledger accounting tables. Also, although we call it as a subledger accounting module, but typically it's not a separate module, but it's set of tables which are there. Now, we are doing this in Fusion, but the history of subledger accounting, XLA set of tables, goes back to R12. They introduced it in around 12, 11, 12. In R12, they introduced this, and it has been a part of R12 ever since. So typically, the flow is like this, that from subledgers, when we run the create accounting process, the create accounting process also routes the data to GL through the subledger module. So if you look at the diagram here, we have the subledgers from AP, AR, PO, inventory, or whatever. Then it comes into create accounting process. Through the create, when we run the create accounting process, through that process, if you remember, through the create accounting process, you can transfer the data from subledgers to the GL. So this is where the create accounting process will first transfer the data into subledger tables and then transfer the same to the GL. So in subledger, it will create the accounting in final or final and post mode. It will populate the subledger tables. Okay, at every step when you're doing, the subledger set of tables will be populated. and it will transfer the data to the GL interface table and launch the GL import program. Clear? So the create accounting process, if you remember, it takes the accounting information from subledgers like AP, AR, and transfers that to GL, right? When we run it, and there are multiple modes like draft, account, final and post. So here in the case of final and or final and post, it will insert the data in the subledger set of tables. In case of draft, you can override that, so it's nothing final. It will be kept there also, but it is not something that is permanent. So in case of final or final and post, it takes it forward, puts it into subledger tables, and then populates the GL import table also, and from there it will run the GL import program also, so that the accounting process will populate the journal tables. It will run in posting mode. It will update the balances. It will review the journals and the reports. So once the balances are updated, we can review the journals and reports. Clear?
Yep.
Rakesh, you okay with this? Okay. Now, if you look at how the sub accounting model is defined in subledgers is right at the outset, the biggest box that you see here, that's your process category. So an example could be invoices. Within that, you have accounting event classes. For example, invoices, credit notes. And within the accounting event classes, you have accounting event types. Okay, what are accounting event types? Things like invoice adjusted, invoice cancelled, invoice validated. So these are individual actions based on which your accounting can happen. Okay, so you have a process category, which is the mean, you can say. Within that, you have the accounting event classes, and within that, you have the accounting event types. Okay, so for each of these category, class, type, we can identify whether to do the accounting or not. Because of that, you can control the accounting at the event type level. Whether you want to do the accounting for a particular event or not, you can control it from there. Okay, you can choose whether you want to allow the accounting to be enabled or not. for each of these category, class, and event type. So event class, like we saw, okay. Now, when we talk about subledger, we also talk about the accounting method. You can have your own accounting method that you define, which is a combination of journal entry rules. Okay, so we call it the journal entry rules set, which is a combination of journal line rules, account rules, description rules, and supporting references. So when you are defining them in the system, you define with all these combinations. Okay. So for example, in description rule, if you notice, when you bring the invoice data from payables or receivables into GL, you do not have any information about your customer or supplier for a particular transaction. Who is the supplier for a particular transaction? Who is the customer? You don't have any information, correct? So you have to always look at the view transaction to check what it is. Now, through these description rules, you can define rules through which you can bring in that information and put it inside a journal rule description. So this journal that you're creating at the subledger level, it will have a description field. In that description, you can populate the journals originating transaction information. For example, if it is coming from payables, you can populate the invoice number, you can populate the supplier reference details, you can populate, if it is coming from receivables, you can populate the customer number, you can populate the invoice number in the description itself. So how this will help you when you are looking at the journal in the subledger, you can immediately track against which particular invoice or particular customer has this data come from. Okay, you can have multiple rules defined. Okay, you can also define certain custom formulas which you can combine. All these are combined together, put into journal entry rules. Okay, which together make up your accounting method. And if you remember, accounting method is one of the things that we link to our ledger. What are the other things? Currency, calendar, chart of accounts. All right. So we have the four C's: currency, chart of accounts, calendar, and convention. Convention is also known as accounting method. So through your accounting method, in that accounting method, you could have a separate accounting method of for yourself. And in that accounting method, you can define different journal rules, which you can put into the ledger. Okay. So what are the journal line rules? Journal lines rules will determine how the debit and credit entries are created. It defines the accounting class and the sources. Based on sources, it will display, the sources will determine what is displayed at the journal level. So when creating the journal rules, we have to select, is it a debit rule or is it a detail, and whether to display the detail or summary. Okay, so in the journal line rules, individual rules, so this is the line level, right? Journal, we talked about header and lines, right? So this is at the line level. Line level, what do we have? We have the accounting information, debit and credit. So here also we will have to say whether this particular rule pertains to a debit or a credit entry. It will define the accounting class also, and whether it will display the detail or summary. So this is about the journal line rules. Oh, okay. Combination of journals is put into the journal entry rule. Okay, so each subledger will have a unique journal entry rule set. Okay, so journal entry rule set is a combination of all the things. So each rule set will contain which event class and type it pertains to, what are the journal line rules, what are the accounting rules, what is the description, what are the supporting references. Supporting references could be like approvals or any documentation requirements that you have, all that information. An individual rule set will have journal rule set header, journal header, and a journal lines. And once we have defined our journal entry rule set, we will activate the journal lines. So this is how we will activate the journal lines. Journal lines, account rules, okay, the description rules, supporting references, all of that.
So what is this journal rule set header and all?
So each just like in a journal, what is our
Hmm.
journal structure that we had talked about? It will have a batch, it will have a header, and it will have a line, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
similarly, in this rule set also, you will have three parts. There will be a header, the journal rule set header, and for that it will say, what is the name of the rule set and what type, and then within that you will have the rules which will apply for the journal header and which will apply for your journal lines.
Okay.
We'll see that, so then it will become clearer. Basically, here they're talking about making different rules which will help you to automate the process, so that once your subledger information is coming into your subledger tables, you can populate all the information from the source system into your journal system, into the journal set of tables. So what happens, when we are bringing the data from payables or receivables, we don't have any idea whether it is PO, or whether it is an invoice, or if it is an invoice, which supplier, which invoice number, or what is the site, and so on. So all this information, you can define the rules for the journal. When the journal gets created, what will go into debit, what will go into credit, all those things you can define in the journal rule set. Journal entry rule set is a combination of these four things: the journal entry line, the journal line rules, account rules, description rules, and the supporting references. And once you have defined the journal entry rule set, it will you will need to activate it. So now we'll do these practices. We'll create an accounting rule. We'll create a description rule. We'll define journal line rules, and we'll define a journal entry rule set. So So these are the practices that we'll be looking at. Defining a count rule, description rule, two journal line rules, and finally the journal entry rule set. Now, when we are defining the accounting rule, we'll have to go to the setup maintenance. Okay. So once we come here, so once we go to the financials, then you can search for, these are the account rules, right? So we'll here account. Okay, so we have the account rules here. So you can pick any one of them. Okay, so we'll define the account rule first. Okay, so account rule will, we will specify particular accounts to which the information will be sent. For example, if you are having a payables invoice, we typically use the expense and the liability account, right? So we'll specify rules where it will always hit a particular liability account, it can always hit a particular expense account which we are going to determine. So traditionally, we know at the payables level, you can specify the account liability and the expense account. That account goes to general ledger, right? Now here, what we are doing, we are intercepting that data and we are transferring the information. So we will define our own rule. So let's go to the account rules here. So you see here you have supporting references, subledger entry rule sets, accounting methods. So all these you can define as per your need and link them to your accounting method. So there are different accounting methods here. If you go back and review, for example, cash account, cash clearing account, and so on, we'll create our own rule. So let's call it SP liability rule. And this is for the entire account combination. So we will define a rule. Okay. There are different options here. We can have an account rule, we can have a mapping set, and we will make it constant. So it will always update a particular account. So is the payables account. Now for this particular rule, we can have certain conditions. Okay. So this is the condition that will build up. So from where is that information going to come? We are going to pick it up from payables. So this one is typically, we'll pick it up from invoice payables. So we'll say invoice. Okay. So all invoice related information will come here. So suppose I want the invoice type, that whether it is a standard invoice or whether it is a debit memo, credit memo, I can choose that. Okay. Now, along with this, I want the condition to apply only for standard type of invoices. Okay. So what are we saying? Our rule will apply for standard type of invoices where the value will be set to this. It will become a constant value and it will be set to this particular. Got it? So we will save and close this. Now once this is done, ensure that it is set to active. In case it is not set to active, you can go to actions from here and you can change the status. Okay. If it is inactive, you can set it to active. If it is active, you can set it to inactive. So that's our account rule that we have defined.
So Saurav, we have to align this for every GL, or the standard set of instruction is already there.
This is as per your need. If you don't have any particular need, you need not define anything.
Okay.
Okay. Suppose you have a requirement that you always want to hit your liability account different than what payables is doing,
Okay.
then you can. Or in certain cases, what they do, the main ledger will follow the standard pattern. You could
Yeah.
have your own subsidiary ledger, or you could have the secondary ledger defined in your own way, maybe for your parent company, or maybe for reporting purposes, you know where you will follow different set of rules. In that case, you can define it for your secondary ledger and link it to your accounting method of the secondary ledger.
Okay.
So that is why uh, these are flexible things that have been provided, which you will define as per your need. So the first one that we had defined was basically for defining the liability account of your invoices. Now we will define another one, which will be for the department segment, where we will say that the particular department rule will apply. So this was a liability rule. So let's make it a department rule. again this will apply, let's say, for this chart of accounts. Now since this is for one particular um, department, we'll say it pertains to the segment. And which segment does it pertain to? Out of our chart of accounts, we'll have to choose the corresponding segment. So in this case, we'll say cost center. So for this, for the department, we want the department to be as per what is given in the invoice distribution. So from the distribution level, whatever account is specified, we want that account to be picked up. So we will look at the standard type of invoice and then look at the invoice distribution account, and from there it will pick up the department information and where it will populate it on the cost center. Okay, and we'll not have, this is, the rule is already there, it is going to pick it up from the invoice distribution, so there won't be any other rule. So now we'll say this will be for our expenses. So we had a liability rule, we had a department rule, now we are having an expense rule. This will again be a account combination, and then we'll add a rule here. So from the standard type of invoice, it will pick up the invoice distribution account and it will put that entire distribution account in the expense rule. So we define three types. Okay, expense, department, and liability. Next, we'll define okay, and what else do we have? We'll define a description. So journal line rules, description rule, account rules, these are the individual pieces which go into subledger journal entry rule. So in this case, we'll also define our own specific rule. Just like we are defining something for payables, you can define the same things for receivables also, similar rules for all your subledgers. So for this particular description, we are going to define a rule. And what is that rule going to be? We will specify the details here. We will say that we want the supplier related information to be displayed in our description. Okay, now the issue was in short name, it is expecting all caps. Okay. So this is the in this the rule that we are going to put is that it will put in the information about the supplier. Okay. So where will it get the supplier information from? We'll put in the we'll search for our supplier. Okay. So we want our supplier name to be put into the description. All right. So if you, in addition, if we want things like supplier number, or we want the vendor, the supply site information, we can put all of that over here. Invoice supplier number, and suppose you want the invoice number also, you can put it here. So there's the invoice date and invoice number. And you can say, let's say save and close. Okay. So now what we have defined a description rule which will pick up the supplier name, supplier number, and the invoice number and put it together. We'll now save and close it. Now after this, we'll define the journal line rules. okay, which is just above this. Now over here, these are the different journal line rules that we have. So we can create a new journal lines rule. So remember, journal, typically a journal has debit and credit, two lines. So for the rules also we'll have two lines, one for the debit and one for the credit. So this pertains to what type of event class it pertains to invoices, and do we want it on the debit side or on the credit side? So we, this rule is for credit rule. So if it is a credit rule, what is going to be the corresponding class, accounting class? That is your liability account. Liability. And whether you want to merge lines or not, say no and leave it like that. Now this one we are done. And we will now create another one. This will be for the debit line. So this will be for the expense side. Earlier one was for liability side. This is for the expense side. So this was the journal line rule for the debit and credit. So where is that debit entry going to come from, and where is the credit entry going to come from? So that is what we are going to tie all of these together in our journal line, journal entry rule set. Okay. And we have this journal entry rule set. So we'll create that. So this will be an SPG journal entry rule set. Okay, if event class is going to be, this will apply for our invoices. What is the event type? It will apply when invoice is adjusted, cancelled, validated. You remember we had seen that, but it will apply to all types. Okay, and which specific chart of accounts? It will apply to the US chart of accounts. And here we have the journal lines. Okay, so for each of these portions, where is the journal entry related? Where is the description rule? Here we have a description rule that we had defined. Okay, so we are linking that description rule here. For the journal lines and all, so for each of the rules that we defined before this, we are now linking that up. Okay, so we'll have the credit rule. So for that credit, our journal line rule was SP credit. Okay, so we'll get that SP credit line. And accounting combination, we had a SP liability, and cost center we had a rule for SP. Rest of it will come from whatever was there in our invoice accounting information, right? So this is for the credit side. We'll have a rule for the debit side also. So for the debit side, we'll again create another line which will define the debit rule. So this is the SP debit line. And in our case, we had the SP liability and SP expense account rule, right? So we'll now look at the SP expenses rule. We are done with defining the account description, the debit line, and whatever we had defined. Now we'll just see the status here is right now incomplete. Okay, we can do the action change status. You can activate it from here, or you can go inside and from there also you can activate it. So now this rule has become active. So our next step is that if you go and look at our ledger, you will find the accounting method that has been used. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Saurabh.
You're- So from the primary ledgers, we'll look at the accounting method and we'll fix that particular accounting method. So if you see the US primary ledger, the accounting accounting method, we can see it here, okay, which is the US standard accrual for the US. Now, when we go to the accounting method, anyone you can pay. So we have the US standard accrual. Okay. So as you can see, an accounting method has rules for every subledger. Okay. And how the individual accounts, how they will be created, how they will be generated. And here you can specify what sort of accounting, what sort of rules you need. So without playing around with this, what we'll do is we can just duplicate that US standard accrual and we'll call it, we can prefix it with our name. So we'll say SP US standard accrual. And we are copying that US chart of account. So whatever is there, that will get copied over. So now this has become a SPUS standard. Now here under this journal entry rule set assignment, we'll be specifying our journal entry rule. Okay, so and effective from, let's say, today. Make sure that the status is active. Just have to put an ending on this. Oh, this is so for this particular rule, this SPJERS will now be applicable. Now you can go back and where you have this ledger options, na? Under that you can go and put this rule, the accounting rule. So let's say we have this specify ledger options. So there, when where you have that accounting rule, accounting method, you can go and give your own accounting method. Okay, this is the accounting method. In the drop down, you will find our own accounting method will be displayed. So let's go and rather than doing it for let's do it for the subledger. Okay. So see if the subledger can be so for the US IFRS secondary ledger, we will see if we can fix it. So we have the SPUS standard accrual rule. Okay. So now we are replacing the accounting method which was there with our own accounting method. All right. Now, similarly, what you could also do is if you want to change the main ledger options, you can go and change the main ledger options as well. At this point of time, we are not changing this. Okay. Now, next step is when we create any sort of accounting, when we run the create accounting process from this rules that we defined was for payables, right? So we'll define the rules for subledger. From subledger, we'll run the create accounting process and we'll see how this works. So we'll now go to payables. So from here you can run the create accounting process. So subledger will say payables. We'll not post it, we'll just leave it at the general ledger level and we'll submit it. Give it a few minutes to run. After that, what you could do is from here itself, you can review the journals. Okay. So you have this review journal entries. This one actually takes you to the subledger set of tables. it didn't find any transactions, so we'll have to create transactions and then post it. So here I'm checking if there are any invoices between this date. So I think we'll be eating for today. Is there? So first and second. See, there's nothing in this month. So that's why the create accounting did not run. So we'll have to just update it and then see it. Create an invoice, validate it, and then we can run this. So that's okay. As of now, we'll stop here. I'll let you guys complete this practice. Okay. And then create an invoice, post it. We can do that in the next class also. Uh, any questions that you may have?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, so please try this out. I know there's a lot of backlog that is piling up, right? So based on that, we can accordingly, we'll try this out in the next class so that we are able to do this successfully. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So tomorrow, what time do we meet?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any 9 o'clock.
Okay. So do wait for me 5-10 minutes here and there, being a Saturday. So typically there might be, a bit delay, but we'll
Yeah,
meet
yeah.
around 9. Okay.
Yeah.